Hi, it's Gary Ford from Tiger Hobbies Limited. We recently did a series of videos about the Spitfire at 90, but we must not forget its stablemate from the Battle of Britain, the Hawker Hurricane. This will be a two-part video. Part 1 will look at the origins of the Hawker Hurricane up to and including the Battle of Britain, and a little bit about the Hawker Aviation Company. Part 2 will look at the hurricane in combat overseas and some of the campaigns fought overseas that really did prevent Great Britain from losing the war overseas on a strategic scale. So, welcome to part 1, the Hawker Hurricane origins. Pups, Tripehounds, Camels, Demons and Furies. In 1912, a wealthy sportsman, Tommy Sopwith, who was involved in yachting and motor racing, found the aviation bug and founded the Sopwith Aviation and Engineering Company, and by 1913 produced the Sopwith Bat Boat. This was a flying boat produced in cooperation with S.E. Saunders. Also at a similar time, a young aircraft engineer who had previously been involved with model flying aircraft was making his way in aviation. This was Sydney Camm. Camm spent World War I with the Martinside Aircraft Company, but it was the Great War that boosted Sopwith, starting with its first successful fighter, the Sopwith Pup, test flown in 1915 by their test pilot, Harry Hawker. After it had produced a series of aircraft called the Strutters, such as aircraft like the 1.5 Strutter. These were more observation and light bomber aircraft. The Pup, or it's given its official name, the Scout, soon proved superior to the German aircraft of the period with very good agility when it entered service in about mid-1916. But the pace of advancement and technology in aviation in the Great War soon found it suffering, along with other RFC aircraft, in bloody April 1917. The Royal Flying Corps sister service, the Royal Naval Air Service, by then had upgraded to the Sopwith triplane, affectionately known as the Tripound. But the Pup was the first aircraft to land on a moving ship in August 1917, with Commander Dunning at the controls. By the middle of 1917, saw the first flight of a new Sopwith Camel, again tested by Harry Hawker. This new aircraft was faster at about 112 miles an hour, but incredibly agile to the point of instability, and it needed a well-trained pilot. Many young pilots met their doom in a Camel crash, though it was the most successful Allied fighter of World War I, and served until 1920 with the Royal Air Force. Some say that the Camel was the Spitfire of its time, but I disagree. I think it was the Hurricane of its time. I think the Spitfire of its time was the SE-5A, Scout Experimental, with a top speed of 140 miles an hour. Slightly less agile, but a much better aircraft all round, and the mount of the top Royal Flying Corps aces, such as Billy Bishop, McCudden, and Mick Mannock with 75 kills. Rumour that Mannock may even got higher than the Red Baron. In the Great War, Sopwith built some 16,000 aircraft, but at peace in 1918 brought a massive crash in income. They tried to diversify with motorbikes, but by 1920 the company was declared insolvent. Thomas Sopwith, along with his friend test pilot Harry Hawker, formed H.G. Hawker Engineering Limited and obtained some Sopwith patents. And their first job was to refurbish Royal Air Force Sopwith Snipe aircraft. And it was the Sopwith Snipe was the last Sopwith fighter to enter service just as the war was ending, but was chosen to be the Royal Air Force post-war fighter over the proven SE-5A that was much faster. In late 1923, Sydney Camm joined Hawker's with his first design, the Hawker Signet, a lightweight civilian aircraft. After this, he was made chief designer at Hawker's and would lead to many British military aircraft of that period. In 1928, the Hawker Hart light bomber was accepted into Royal Air Force service after a number of other Hawker aircraft were actually rejected. The Hart would lead to a series of very successful interwar Royal Air Force aircraft, such as the Nimrod, Demon, Ordux, and finally the Fury, the first 200 mile an hour Royal Air Force fighter aircraft. There was a point during the mid-1930s that 85% of all the Royal Air Force's combat aircraft were designed by Sydney Camm. In 1933, H.G. Hawker's became Hawker Aircraft Limited, one of the most successful and powerful British aircraft companies at the time. In the 1930s depression, it took advantage and purchased the Gloucester Aircraft Company, Armstrong Siddeley, an automotive company, along with its aircraft company, Armstrong Whitworth, and finally A.V. Roe, better known to all as Avro. In the early 1930s, talks between the Royal Air Force and Camm about producing a fast biplane version of the successful Fury, but the Air Ministry were actually not interested, still preferring the biplanes. But personnel changes at the top in the Air Ministry, including Hugh Dowding as Air Member for Supply and Research. Finally, the specification F5/34 was issued in 1934 for a fast, modern, single-seater monoplane fighter. Luckily for the Royal Air Force, Camm's team were already working on the upgrade to the Fury biplane. The Air Ministry, though, turned down the first Rolls-Royce Goshawk engine-powered design, but with the inclusion of the new Rolls-Royce PV-12, later known as Merlin, it was finally accepted as a design in 1934. The mock-up of what was known as the Interceptor fighter had 2 machine guns in the nose and 1 in each wing, and after ground testing and taxiing, prototype K5083, with Flight Lieutenant George Bullman at the controls, took off on the 6th of November 1935. Excuse me. Testing went well, and by mid-1936, a new wing with 8 machine guns was ready. But the only downside was poor spin recovery, and it needed the Royal Aircraft Establishment, the RAE, to resolve the problem with small extensions to the bottom of the rudder. But the first 61 production aircraft did not get this modification. And on the 26th of June 1936, the name Hurricane was accepted and officially named by King Edward VIII at Royal Air Force Martlesham Heath. The Hurricane took 10,000 man-hours to produce, compared to 15,000 for the Spitfire. The Hurricane's design was evolutionary rather than revolutionary, thus many more Hurricanes were in service when the war started, about 550 compared to 180 Spitfires. The Royal Air Force went to France in 1939, consisting of many types of aircraft, but the brunt of air-to-air combat fell to the Hurricane, which as we know now was available in much higher numbers than the Spitfire. In fact, only a few photographic reconnaissance Spitfires ever flew over France during the period of what was known as the Battle of France. We often think of the 1940s Battle of France as retreat and defeat, and on the ground, well, this was very much the case. But the Royal Air Force and other Allied air forces performed heroics in trying to stem the German tide. The first Air Victoria crosses of the war went to Flying Officer Garland and Sergeant Grey in their ferry battles, leading attacks on the bridges over the Albert Canal, trying to stop the German advance. The RAF lost hundreds of aircraft, including many Hurricanes, but gave as good as they got, resulting in the first Royal Air Force aces of the war, pilots like Flight Lieutenant Cobber Kane and Sergeants Ginger Lacey and Sammy Allard. In the Hurricane, the Germans found a foe in the right hand, at least almost as equal to that of the Bf-109, capable of turning tighter, taking far more punishment than the fabled German fighter. In fact, German air losses over France were huge, possibly 1,500 aircraft, including almost 400 Bf-109s. But the Royal Air Force lost over 900 machines, including 400 Hurricanes. Most of the Hurricanes were destroyed on the ground, many in the initial attacks by the Germans in early May 1940. And in fact, only about 75 Hurricanes were downed in air-to-air combat, so they really did give a good account of themselves. For all its valiant efforts, the Allied air forces could not change the result of the battle, in spite of a few brief counterattacks, like the one at Arras by the British tanks. The German army divisions proved too powerful and completely outfoxed the combined larger Allied armies. Over Dunkirk, the Hurricane was at last joined by the Spitfire, and even though at the time it was stated by many on the beaches, "Where's the bloody Royal Air Force?" they were further inland, giving the Germans a bloody nose. The RAF actions over Dunkirk helped the Royal Navy and the little ships evacuate over 340,000 Allied troops. The Battle of Britain was a defining moment for both the Hurricane and the Spitfire. Britain's war production at the time was better than the Germans, and soon providing Hurricanes in massive numbers and growing numbers of Spitfires. The Royal Air Force was equipped with about 400 Hurricanes and about 200 Spitfires by the time the battle started in July 1940. The Hurricane had suffered heavy losses, much of it on the ground in France, but production had got the numbers back up. Spitfire production was not in full swing, and new factories not yet fully online. It was the Hurricane that would down 2/3 of all the German aircraft lost in the battle, with many celebrated aces, like continuing success of Sergeant Ginger Lacey with 18 victories in the battle, plus Sergeant Josef Frankiszek, a Czech flying with the Polish 303 Squadron, with 17 kills in only 3 weeks during September 1940. Flight Lieutenant Nicholson of 249 Squadron, winning the only Victoria Cross awarded to an RAF fighter pilot in World War II, after trying to get back into his burning Hurricane during a bailout to destroy a German bomber. Contrary to popular belief, the Hurricane accounted for many Bf-109s during the battle, with pilots racking up numerous victories over the 109. The Hurricane turned tighter than both the Bf-109 and the Spitfire, and it was a much steadier gun platform than both. Even though it had got 8.303 machine guns, these were grouped in 2 tight groups of 4, as stated, pumping out some 9,600 rounds cycling. That's an awful lot of lead in the air at the same time. But the Battle of Britain was also the turning point for both aircraft. By the time the battle petered out in October 1940, Spitfire production was growing in ever greater numbers, and the Spitfire's higher speed, better climb rate and potential for further development resulted in more and more Royal Air Force squadrons converting to Spitfire. During the Battle of Britain, about 1,700 Hurricanes were used compared to 800 Spitfires, so you can see how UK production had kept up during the battle. By the end of the Battle of Britain, the massive Spitfire factory at Castle Bromwich was now in full swing, and as stated, more and more RAF squadrons were converting to the Spitfire. So I'll look now briefly at the designer Sydney Camm and the Orca airplane company. So, Sydney Camm, often overlooked by the Spitfire's initial designer R.J. Mitchell, went on to become one of the most influential British aircraft designers of World War II and later, working on all those wonderful Orca biplanes during the late 1920s and 1930s, and of course the Hawker Hurricane, plus Hawker Typhoon, Tempest, Fury/Sea Fury, the Seahawk Jet, the Hawker Hunter, and finally working on the project Orca P1127 that would become the Harrier, all from a young man working on powered model aircraft before World War I. The Hawker Aviation Company became the Orca Siddeley Group post-World War II, then under departments of HSA, the Orca Siddeley Aviation, and HSD, Orca Siddeley Dynamics, with its work in space and missiles. In 1959, it acquired the Folland Company, makers of the Nat jet, then de Havilland and Blackburn aircraft companies by 1963. Finally, in 1977, all its aviation assets were combined under nationalisation along with the British Aircraft Corporation and Scottish Aviation to form British Aerospace, which has then since become BAE Systems. The non-aviation side went its own way under such things as railway and the Canadian companies such as Avro Canada. And in 1993, BAE sold the corporate jet known for its HS-125 corporate jet family to the USA in what was known as Hawker Beechcraft. This lasted until 2013, when the name Hawkers disappeared from the aviation world, when its parent company went under. In front of the display, while we've been talking, is a BAE Systems Hawk T1, the last lineage of the old Orca's name still in service with the Royal Air Force. It started as a Hawker Siddeley jet in the late 1960s. We'll have the new the Orca Siddeley or BAE Systems Red Arrows Hawk T1 with us very, very soon. But you notice that lovely curved tail on the Hawk that was carried by many Hawker aircraft. In the next episode, we'll talk about the Hawker Hurricane, along with the Royal Navy that really stopped the United Kingdom from losing the war overseas in late 1941, early 1942. Now, because the next video is going to be slightly longer, I thought I'd take the opportunity on this video to look at some of the models on the display. So, let's look at the top from left to right. We've got 2 fantastic armour 148 Orca Hurricanes, a 2C from Operation Jubilee, which is the Dieppe, and a Hurricane Mark 1 Trop. These are both around about, I think the 2C is £45 and the new Mark 1 Trop is £49. Just next to it, on to the right, is an Italier, again 148 Hurricane 2C. This is around about £30. On the next row is a Italieri Hawker Hurricane Mark 1 of Battle of Britain. Again, just over £30. And in the centre is the new Revel 1/32 scale Hawker Sea Hurricane Mark 2C. And this one, again, is $39.99. So super value for a brand new tooled large 1/32 scale kit. Just to the right of that is another Hawker Hurricane from Italieri. This time a Mark 1, and again, $29.99. So super value. Right in at the front, you've got another Armour Hurricane Mark 1 in 48 scale. Just arrived, and again, this is around about £49. And then just to the left and right, you've got some 72nd scale Armour Hawker Hurricanes, a 2C Trop for about $22.99, and the new Mark 2D with the massive 40mm cannons, like an early version of the A10, and that's $27.99. These new Armour Hurricanes, Armour is an incredible model kit company, and their Hurricanes really have pushed the levels of detail on the Hawker Hurricanes. And at the back as well are two really good value models. We sometimes bring a bit of trumpeter in, not a lot, and I always bring the 1/24 scale Hawker Hurricanes. And as you can see, we've got the Hurricane Mark 2C and the Hurricane Mark 2D Trop. These normally retail for almost £100, but Tag Hobbies have got these for just $69.99, which is superb value. Anyway, once again, thank you for watching this video about the Hawker Hurricane. I'll see you in part 2 about the Hawker Hurricane in combat overseas.